The silence in the Millennium Hall was louder than an explosion as 500 powerful shareholders stared at the photo in their hands. Derek stood on stage in his $10,000 suit, thinking he had won. He did not know that the envelope I placed on every red velvet seat was not just a picture of his affair, but a death sentence for his career. Today, I would show him exactly how to demolish a life. My name is Elena Rostova. I sat motionless in the front row of the Millennium Hall in New York, a space so vast and opulent that it felt more like a cathedral than a conference center. The air inside the auditorium was heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and the electric hum of anticipation. This was the most significant shareholder meeting in the history of Horizon Architects, and the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen tears, casting a prism of light over the heads of the 500 most powerful people in the construction industry. Derek Vance stood on the stage like a deity descending from Olympus. At 42 years old, my husband still possessed the kind of rugged charm that made investors open their checkbooks without a second thought. He wore a custom Italian suit that cost $10,000. The fabric shimmered slightly under the stage lights, hugging his shoulders in a way that screamed power and dominance. He looked like a man who had already won the war before the first shot was fired. His posture was relaxed, and his smile was practiced perfection. He exuded the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. Standing right beside him was Sloane Kincaid. She was 28 years old and the chief financial officer of our company. She was also the woman I had called my best friend for 10 years. She wore a tight cream dress that accentuated the slight swell of her stomach. She kept stroking it protectively, a gesture designed to elicit sympathy and admiration from the crowd. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I watched her hand glide over the fabric, knowing the sickening truth that lay beneath. I sat on the opposite side of the aisle, an island of darkness in a sea of gray and navy suits. I wore a simple black ensemble that was sharp enough to cut glass. My face was a mask of porcelain, devoid of any emotion. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply existed as a silent observer to their triumph. Derek leaned down to whisper in her ear, assuming the distance and the noise of the crowd would shield his words. But I knew him. I knew the way his jaw moved when he was plotting. Just stick to the script, Derek whispered, his voice low and breathy, audible only to her, but visible to me. After this presentation, she is out on the street. And you will be the new Mrs. Vance. Sloane giggled softly, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. I cannot wait to see her face when you announce the restructuring, she whispered back, biting her lower lip. I shifted my gaze to the audience. On every single one of the 500 plush red seats sat a dark blue velvet envelope. I had personally ensured they were placed there by the event staff an hour ago. They were thick, heavy, and sealed with wax. On the front of each envelope, embossed in gold foil, were the words supplementary material. They looked like exclusive invitations or perhaps a high-end brochure. Derek stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. He launched into his presentation about the Skyline Super City project. He spoke with passion, waving his hands as giant renderings appeared on the screen behind him. He used words like my vision and my legacy repeatedly. He claimed ownership of every curve, every angle, and every innovation of the design. He completely ignored my presence, erasing 15 years of my work with every sentence he spoke. I saw a few curious shareholders in the front row reach for the blue velvet envelopes. They ran their fingers over the expensive texture, intrigued by the weight of the package. Derek noticed the movement and raised a hand, flashing his signature charming grin. "Please," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth, "do not open the envelopes. Just yet. I want the surprise. To be perfect. Let me finish showing you the future first. The shareholders obeyed, placing the envelopes back on their laps. They had no idea they were holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. I looked down at the expensive watch on my wrist. I was counting down the seconds. The silence in my head was deafening. Slowly, I lifted my head and locked eyes with Derek across the vast distance of the hall. He paused mid-sentence. My gaze was not angry. It was not sad. It was the dead, flat look of a predator that had cornered its prey. I saw a flicker of confusion pass over his face, a sudden chill that seemed to run down his spine. He faltered for a fraction of a second, his confident smile twitching at the corners. The countdown was over. It started 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday evening that felt entirely ordinary. Derek had just returned from what he claimed was a grueling business trip to Dubai. He was in the shower, washing off the supposed desert dust, and I was tidying up the walk-in closet. His leather wallet had fallen out of his suit pocket and landed on the plush carpet. I bent down to pick it up, intending to simply place it on the dresser, but my thumb brushed against a hidden compartment behind his credit cards. It felt too thick. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I slid my finger inside and pulled out a small, square object. It was a Polaroid picture. The colors were vibrant, capturing a scene that was definitely not a boardroom in Dubai. The background showed the distinctive turquoise waters of a resort in the Maldives. In the foreground were 2 people locked in a passionate embrace. One was my husband, Derek. The other was Sloane. They were kissing with an intensity that made my stomach churn. My hands trembled as I flipped the photograph over. In Sloane's distinctive, loopy handwriting, ink that I had seen on birthday cards and financial reports for a decade, was a message that shattered my world. Happy secret 2nd anniversary of us, and welcoming the future heir. The note read. I felt the air leave my lungs. I collapsed onto the floor, my knees hitting the carpet with a dull thud. It felt like I had been stabbed in the chest, not once, but twice. The first blade came from the man I had shared my bed and my dreams with for 15 years. The second blade came from the woman I had treated like a little sister. Sloane was the one I cried to when the doctors told me I would likely never conceive. Memories flooded back, twisting in my mind like a knife. I remembered the dinner she had at our house just last month. I remembered her holding my hand across the table, her eyes wide with fake sympathy as I talked about my struggles with infertility. "Oh, Elena, it must be so hard for you," she had said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sweetness. Maybe it is just not meant to be right now. She had been sleeping with my husband for 2 years. She had been mocking me to my face while carrying his child. A scream built up in my throat, a primal sound of pure agony. I wanted to storm into the bathroom, throw the shower door open, and scream until my vocal cords snapped. I wanted to tear the house down, but I stopped. I closed my eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. I am an architect. I do not destroy things in a fit of passion. I dismantle them with precision. I realized in that moment that anger is just an instinct, but revenge is a form of art. If I screamed now, I would be just a hysterical wife. If I waited, I could be his executioner. I stood up and placed the wallet back exactly where I found it, minus the photo. That night, I waited until Derek was in a deep sleep, snoring softly beside me as if he hadn't just murdered my soul. I slipped out of bed and went to his home office. I knew his password. He was arrogant enough to never change it. I spent 4 hours going through every file, every email, and every hidden folder. What I found was worse than the affair. I found draft emails to his lawyers. They were planning to blindside me. She is unstable. One email from Derek read, "We can use the lack of an heir," and her recent mood swings to force a vote of no confidence. He was going to use Sloane's pregnancy as the ultimate weapon. They planned to present me as a barren, mentally unstable woman who was unfit to lead Horizon, while presenting Sloan as the mother of the future of the company. They were not just going to leave me, they were going to erase me. They wanted to take my company, my money, and my dignity. I did not cry. The tears had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I inserted a flash drive and copied everything, every bank transfer, every secret message, every legal draft. As the progress bar reached 100%, I felt a strange sense of calm. I walked back to the bedroom and stood over Derek. He looked so peaceful, so oblivious. "Sleep well, my darling," I whispered into the darkness, my voice barely audible, because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. I smiled, and it was the coldest smile I had ever worn. The plan for the shareholder meeting began to form in my mind, brick by brick, structure by structure. I was going to bring the whole house down on top of them. Most people in this room look at Derek and see the visionary behind Horizon Architects. They see the man who graced the cover of Forbes last month under the headline, Architect of the Year. But the truth is, Horizon did not start in a glass skyscraper with panoramic views of Manhattan. It started 15 years ago in my rented studio apartment in Queens, a place that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and had a ceiling that leaked every time it rained. Back then, Derek was nothing more than a smooth-talking real estate agent with a smile that could sell ice to a polar bear, but he could not draw a straight line to save his life. I was the one hunched over the drafting table for 18 hours a day, my fingers stained with graphite, sketching the blueprints that would eventually win us our first major awards. I was the genius. He was just the mouth. Over the years, the dynamic shifted in a way that was so subtle I barely noticed until it was too late. Derek craved the spotlight like a flower craves the sun. When the reporters came calling, he stepped forward, and I stepped back. He told me it was better for business. You know, the clients respond better to a man in a suit. Elena, he had told me one night, swirling his scotch, "You are the soul of the company, but let me be the face. It is just easier that way." I foolishly agreed. I took the title of creative director, working in the shadows to feed his fragile ego, letting him take credit for buildings he did not even know the square footage of. I convinced myself I was doing it for our marriage, to keep the peace. I was wrong. I was feeding a monster. Then there was Sloan. The betrayal with her stung differently because I was the one who built her, just as I had built this company. I hired her straight out of college when she was just a 22-year-old intern with cheap shoes and hungry eyes. I taught her how to read a balance sheet. I mentored her. I promoted her to chief financial officer over candidates with twice her experience because I trusted her. I treated her like the daughter I could not have. Now, looking at the data I had stolen from Derek's computer, I realized my mentorship was merely an opportunity for them to rob me blind. They had set up a complex web of ghost projects. There were phantom renovations for buildings that did not exist and consultation fees for companies that were just shell corporations. They were siphoning millions of dollars out of Horizon to fund a lifestyle I had unknowingly paid for. They bought a villa in Tuscany and a fleet of luxury cars, all registered under the names of Sloane's cousins to avoid detection. But the financial theft was not the deepest cut. The deepest cut was discovering that Derek had been selling the rights to my old, unused designs to our direct competitors. He had taken my intellectual property, the sketches I had poured my soul into, and sold them for quick cash to cover his massive losses in cryptocurrency speculation. He had treated my art like it was nothing more than a commodity to be liquidated. I remembered a fight we had 6 months ago, one that made sense now in a terrifying way. I had complained about being tired, about the workload. Stop complaining and just draw. Elena, he had snapped at me, his eyes cold and dismissive. That is what you are, a drawing machine. I am the one who brings in the money. You just function. He viewed me as an appliance, a tool that had become obsolete now that he had found a younger, more willing accomplice in Sloane. I realized then that I was not just fighting a cheating husband, I was fighting for the survival of my life's work. Horizon Architects was my child, the only child I would ever have, and these two parasites were trying to steal it from me. I had sacrificed my name, my fame, and my pride for 15 years to build this empire. I was not going to let a failed realtor and his pregnant mistress take it away from me without burning the whole world down first. I knew that emotion would be my enemy and data would be my savior. I needed absolute proof, the kind that could withstand a team of high-priced defense lawyers. I hired a private investigator who used to work for the FBI and a forensic accountant who was known for dismantling organized crime syndicates. I paid them in cash and gave them one instruction: find everything. They spent 2 weeks digging through the digital and physical refuse of my husband's life. What they found was a roadmap of deceit that spanned 5 years. The forensic accountant sat me down in a dim coffee shop and slid a thick binder across the table. You need to look at the Future Investment Fund, he said, tapping the paper with a grim expression. It sounded legitimate, but it was a lie. The Future Investment Fund was nothing more than a bottomless pit used to finance Sloane's extravagant lifestyle. Every designer handbag, every first-class flight, and every piece of jewelry she flaunted had been paid for by the company's shareholders under the guise of market research or client relations. But the most damaging piece of evidence was not financial. It was biological. My investigator found a sealed medical file from the Mayo Clinic dating back 10 years. Derek had gone to great lengths to bury it. I opened the folder and read the diagnosis: severe complications from mumps in adulthood leading to permanent azoospermia. My husband was sterile. He had known for a decade that he could never father a child. Yet he had watched me cry over negative pregnancy tests month after month. He had let me blame myself. He had let me believe I was the broken one. Then came the emails. I found a thread between Derek and his personal attorney with the subject line, "Strategy for Breach. We need to provoke her." Derek had written, "If we can get her to attack me or act irrationally in public, we can void the prenup based on the mental instability clause." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. He was not just cheating. He was actively trying to gaslight me into insanity to save a few $1,000,000. I took all of this to Arthur Sterling. Arthur was the chairman of the board, a man of unimpeachable integrity who viewed Horizon Architects as his legacy. We met in his private library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and mahogany. I laid out the photos, the bank statements, and the medical records. Arthur looked through them in silence. His face turned pale, then red with suppressed rage. He looked up at me, his eyes hard. "Elena, this is monstrous," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. "What do you want to do? I want to burn it all down." "Arthur," I replied calmly, "and I need you to let me do it my way." We made a deal. I spent the next 48 hours in a frenzy of preparation. I printed 500 copies of the dossier. It included the photo of the kiss, the bank transfer records showing the theft, and the medical diagnosis proving his sterility. I personally went to the printing house to ensure no leaks occurred. Then came the switch. I used my master key to access the storage room at the Millennium Hall the morning before the event. I removed the glossy, harmless marketing brochures from the blue velvet envelopes and replaced them with my lethal dossier. I sealed each one carefully, my hands steady. At home, I played the role of the supportive wife to perfection. I ironed Derek's shirt. I straightened his tie. I told him how proud I was of him. "You are going to kill it out there." "Honey," I said, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. "I know," he replied, checking his reflection in the mirror, oblivious to the double meaning of my words. The night before the meeting, he came into the bedroom holding a document. It was a voting proxy form. "Elena, babe," he said, flashing that charming smile that used to melt my heart. Since the meeting is going to be technical, and you have been so stressed lately, maybe you should just sign your voting rights over to me for this session, just to simplify things. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was weak. I looked at the paper. If I signed it, he would have total control. Of course. Derek, I said softly, I trust you. Completely. I took the pen and signed my name with a flourish, handing it back to him. He grinned, tucking the paper into his pocket like a trophy. He went to sleep that night thinking he had won the kingdom. He had no idea he had just handed me the match to light the fuse. Back in the Millennium Hall, the air was thick with hypocrisy. Derek stood behind the podium, his face illuminated by the spotlight, preaching about integrity. He spoke about how Horizon Architects was built on a foundation of trust and family values. It took every ounce of my self-control not to laugh out loud. He was weaving a narrative of moral superiority while standing next to the woman he was using to dismantle my life. And none of this, Derek said, gesturing grandly to the screen, would be possible without my right hand, the woman who has helped steer this ship into the future. Please welcome our CFO, Sloane Kincaid. Sloane walked onto the stage, beaming. She placed a hand on her stomach, a subtle signal to the room that screamed of fertility and future. Derek looked at her with a warmth he had not shown me in years. He was hinting at a new era, a new dynasty, right in front of my face. He was introducing his mistress as the savior of the company I built. It was time. I stood up. The movement was sharp and sudden. The room was dim, but my silhouette cut through the darkness. I held a wireless microphone that I had requested from the sound technician 5 minutes earlier, claiming I wanted to make a supportive toast. "Excuse me, Derek," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady through the massive speakers, cutting him off mid-sentence. Derek froze. He squinted into the darkness, trying to find me. "Elena, honey, we are in the middle of a presentation. Please sit down." I ignored him. I turned to the audience, 500 faces looking back at me in confusion. The tension in the room spiked immediately. "Before we proceed to the vote on the restructuring," I said, my voice calm but piercing, "I think it is crucial that every shareholder in this room examines the document labeled Number 1 inside your envelopes." For a second, nobody moved. Then, one person tore open the seal, then another. Within moments, the sound of tearing paper filled the hall like a sudden clap of thunder. It was the sound of a dam breaking. 500 people pulled out the first sheet of paper simultaneously. It was the Polaroid. I had enlarged it in high definition. The image of Derek and Sloane kissing in the Maldives was unmistakable. The intimacy was raw. The date stamp was clear. The handwritten note about their secret anniversary was printed clearly below the image. A collective gasp swept through the room, sucking the oxygen out of the air. Then came the whispers. They started low, like buzzing bees, and quickly grew into a roar of shock and outrage. People were pointing. Phones were raised. The respectful silence of the shareholder meeting shattered into 1,000 pieces. Derek looked down at the front row. He saw the photo in the hands of our biggest investor. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. Panic replaced his arrogance instantly. He realized what was happening. He lunged off the stage. "Stop!" he screamed. He ran down the stairs, heading straight for me, his eyes wide with fury. "Give me that microphone!" But he never reached me. 2 large security guards, men I had hired personally that morning and instructed to protect the shareholders from potential disruptions, stepped in his path. They blocked him like a concrete wall. "Let me go!" Derek shouted, struggling against their grip, his $10,000 suit bunching up awkwardly. "That woman is on stage." Sloane was a statue. She saw the photo on the giant monitor where the presentation used to be. My forensic team had hacked the feed. She gasped, her hands flying up to cover her face with her designer clutch. But it was too late. The live stream cameras zoomed in, broadcasting her shame to the entire world. She looked trapped, a deer in the headlights of her own destruction. I did not flinch. I looked directly at the camera, then at the board members. This is not a domestic dispute. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. This is not about jealousy. This is evidence that your CEO and CFO have been engaged in an undisclosed relationship for 2 years, a direct violation of the morality clause in their contracts, and a severe conflict of interest. Derek was foaming at the mouth, his perfect hair now disheveled as he fought the guards. "She is lying," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "She is crazy. That is Photoshop. It is a fake. She is trying to destroy this company because she is jealous and unstable. Do not listen to her." His denial was loud, desperate, and completely futile. The war had begun, and he was trying to fight a nuclear explosion with a water pistol. While the shock of the affair was still rippling through the room, I did not give them a moment to breathe. Infidelity might upset a wife, but embezzlement upsets shareholders. And nothing angers a rich man more than knowing someone is stealing his money. I tightened my grip on the microphone. "Please turn your attention to page 2 of the dossier," I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. The sound of rustling paper filled the air again, but this time the reaction was not gossip, it was fury. "You will notice a series of monthly wire transfers to an entity listed as Kincaid Consulting," I explained, pointing to the highlighted rows on the projection screen I had hijacked. These payments were categorized as strategic consulting fees. However, Kincaid Consulting has no employees, no office, and no clients other than Horizon Architects. Over the last 24 months, the total amount transferred to this shell account is $5 million. A heavy silence fell over the room, the kind that precedes a riot. $5 million. That was not a rounding error. That was dividend money. That was profit. The investors who had been smiling at Derek 10 minutes ago were now looking at him with eyes that could cut glass. "If you look at the attached credit card statements on page 3, I continued, relentless, "you will see that these consulting fees were used to fund a very specific lifestyle. 5-star hotels in Paris, jewelry from Cartier, and designer wardrobes. None of these were business expenses. They were personal gifts." Sloane, realizing she was being stripped bare in front of the very people she tried to impress, grabbed the podium microphone. Her hands were shaking visibly. "These were necessary expenditures," she stammered, her voice shrill and desperate. I was building the brand image I was networking with. With high net worth individuals, I cut her off immediately. "You spent $15,000 on a single handbag. Sloane. And while you were building this so-called image, Horizon's net profit dropped by 8% last quarter. We are losing money while you are playing dress-up." The murmurs in the crowd turned into angry shouts. A prominent investor in the third row stood up and threw the dossier on the floor. The board of directors looked at each other, their faces grim. Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board, stood up from his seat in the center. He was an elderly man, but his presence was formidable. He raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough," Arthur said, his voice low but booming with authority. He looked at Derek with pure disappointment. "Mr. Vance, based on the evidence presented, I am invoking Article 4 of the company bylaws. Your authority to conduct this meeting is suspended immediately. Security, please escort them off the stage." Derek looked around wildly. He was sweating profusely now, his carefully gelled hair sticking to his forehead. He saw his empire crumbling, his allies turning into enemies. He needed a lifeline. He needed a shield. He looked at Sloane's stomach. "Wait, you cannot do this," Derek screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "I am the only one who holds the relationships with our key clients. If I go, they go, and you are forgetting something." He ran over to Sloane and grabbed her arm, pulling her forward roughly. She winced, tears streaming down her face. "She is pregnant," Derek yelled, pointing at her belly. "She is carrying my child, my heir, the future of this company. You cannot throw out the mother of the next generation of Horizon. This is a family legacy." He was using an unborn child as a human shield. He was banking on the old-fashioned values of the board, hoping that the promise of a successor would buy him mercy. He thought the heir was his ace in the hole. I watched him from the floor, feeling a cold, dark amusement bubbling in my chest. He had just walked right into the final trap. I smiled. It was a smile so cold it could have frozen the Hudson River. "The heir," I asked softly into the microphone, the sound amplified to a terrifying volume. "Yes. Let us talk about that. Turn to the final page," I commanded, my voice devoid of any warmth. "This is a certified medical report from the Mayo Clinic, dated 10 years ago. I suggest you read the diagnosis section carefully." Derek looked down at the paper in his hand. I watched his eyes scan the document. I saw the exact moment the words registered in his brain. His face went from red to a ghostly white. The report detailed a severe case of orchitis, a complication from the mumps infection he had suffered as a teenager. The conclusion was written in bold, unforgiving medical terminology: irreversible azoospermia. This is impossible," Derek stammered, looking up at me with eyes full of fear. I am a healthy man. There is nothing wrong with me." "You never bothered to get checked. Did you, Derek?" I asked, my voice echoing through the hall. "You were so arrogant, so sure of your own virility, that you spent 15 years blaming me. You let me endure invasive tests, hormone injections, and the heartbreak of failure month after month. You let me believe I was the broken one." I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at him. "I found this file years ago." I continued softly. "I kept it a secret because I loved you. I wanted to protect your fragile ego. I did not want you to feel less of a man. But you used my silence as a weapon. You planned to divorce me and tell the world I was a barren woman to justify your betrayal." Derek shook his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at the medical report, then at Sloane's protruding belly. The math was simple, and the conclusion was devastating. "So," I said, turning my gaze to Sloane, who was trembling violently on the stage, "Miss Kincaid, we have a mathematical problem here. My husband is medically incapable of fathering a child. He has 0 sperm count. So I have to ask you, who is the father of the baby in your womb?" Sloane turned pale. She clutched her stomach, stepping back as if the floor was burning her feet. It is complicated," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Elena, please, we can discuss this in private." "No," Derek roared. He scrambled back up the stairs, ignoring the security guards who stepped aside to let the drama play out. He grabbed Sloane by the shoulders. Tell them it is mine. You swore to me. You said I was. You said it was a miracle Sloane refused to look at him." She bit her lip, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "She cannot tell you that, Derek," I said calmly, "because she knows I have the answer." I signaled to the control booth, "Play video file number 4. The giant screen behind us flickered to life. It was a grainy, black and white video taken from a surveillance camera. The timestamp was from 3 months ago. The setting was a dimly lit booth in a high-end restaurant uptown. Sloane was sitting there, laughing and drinking wine. Sitting across from her, holding her hand and caressing her stomach, was a man everyone in the room recognized instantly. It was Julian Thorne, the CEO of the Vortex Group, our biggest, most ruthless competitor. A collective gasp of horror swept through the 500 shareholders. This was no longer just a sex scandal. This was corporate espionage. You see? I narrated as the video played, showing Julian Thorne handing Sloane a thick envelope. Sloane was not just sleeping with my husband. She was planted here. She has been feeding our proprietary data to Vortex for 2 years. And that baby, that is the heir to the Vortex empire, not Horizon. Derek was just the useful idiot they used to open the door. Derek released Sloane as if she were radioactive. He stumbled back, his face a mask of pure devastation. You, Derek gasped, his voice breaking into a sob. You were working for Thorne. The whole time, you told me you loved me. You told me. We were going to build an empire. Sloane straightened her dress. Realizing the game was up, her mask of innocence fell away, replaced by a look of cold, hard calculation. Oh, grow up, Derek, she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Did you really think I was in love with a middle-aged man who cannot even get his own wife pregnant? Julian promised me a seat on his board. You were just a stepping stone. Derek looked at her, then at the screen where his rival was kissing the woman he thought carried his child. He looked at me, standing tall and vindicated. His knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the stage floor. A man broken not by his enemies, but by his own vanity. The realization shattered whatever sanity Derek had left. He did not just look defeated, he looked rabid. With a guttural roar that sounded more animal than human, he lunged at Sloane. His fingers curled into claws, aiming for the neck of the woman who had been his co-conspirator just moments ago. You traitor, Derek screamed, spit flying from his mouth. You whore! How could you do this to me? He never reached her. The security guards I had positioned on the wings of the stage moved with military precision. They tackled him mid-air, slamming him onto the hardwood floor with a bone-jarring thud. He thrashed against them, his face pressed against the floorboards, screaming about betrayal and lies. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Here was a man who had spent 2 years lying to his wife, now weeping because his mistress had lied to him. Sloane did not flinch. She stepped back, smoothing down her cream dress with a look of utter disdain. The mask of the sweet, supportive partner was gone, replaced by the cold, hard features of a mercenary. She looked down at Derek as if he were a cockroach she had just stepped on. You are just a fool. Derek, she sneered, her voice amplified by the microphone that had fallen near her feet. Did you really think I loved you? Look at you. You are old, you are incompetent, and you are about to be bankrupt. I picked the winning horse. It just turned out to be Julian, not you. The auditorium erupted. The 500 shareholders, usually so composed and polite, were on their feet. They were booing. Voices shouted from the back of the room. Get them out of here, one man yelled. Call the police, screamed another. Arthur Sterling gestured to the company's chief legal counsel, who stepped up to the edge of the stage. He adjusted his glasses and spoke with the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. Mr. Vance, Ms. Kincaid, the lawyer announced, his voice booming over the chaos. Effective immediately, your employment with Horizon Architects is terminated for cause. Furthermore, we are filing criminal charges for embezzlement, corporate espionage, and fraud. You are done. Derek stopped struggling. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He was losing his job, his lover, his child, and his freedom in the span of 10 minutes. Panic replaced his rage. He looked around the hostile room and realized he had no allies left. Then, his eyes found me. He scrambled to his knees, shaking off the grip of the guards, and crawled toward me. He looked pathetic, his expensive suit torn at the shoulder, tears streaking through the sweat on his face. He reached out and grabbed my hand with a desperate, clammy grip. "Elena, Elena, please," he begged, his voice trembling. "You have to help me. I was tricked. She manipulated me. I am your husband, Elena. We are family. You cannot let them take me away. Please, save me." I looked down at his hand clutching mine. It was the same hand that had signed the checks to his mistress. The same hand that had held her in that photo. I felt nothing but revulsion. I pulled my hand away sharply, brushing my sleeve as if I had just touched something filthy. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice ice cold. But I love you," he stammered, sobbing now. "We can fix this. We can start over." I leaned in close, so only he could hear the final nail being driven into his coffin. "We did not end today, Derek," I whispered. "We ended the moment you put that photo in your wallet and planned to throw me out on the street. You wanted a new life. Well, enjoy prison." At that moment, the double doors at the back of the hall burst open. 4 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit marched down the aisle, their badges glinting under the chandeliers. They were not there for a social visit. They marched up the stairs, handcuffs rattling at their belts, coming to collect the trash I had just swept out of my house. The police officers were just inches away from grabbing Derek when he played his final, desperate card. He yanked his arm back, his chest heaving with exertion. He looked up at the balcony where the board of directors sat, his eyes wide with a manic intensity that made the shareholders recoil. "You cannot throw me out," Derek screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I own the rights to the Skyline project. I am the lead architect on paper if you fire me. I take the project with me, without me. This billion-dollar dream is dead. The company will collapse." A ripple of genuine fear went through the auditorium. The Skyline project was not just a building, it was the financial future of Horizon Architects for the next 5 years. Investors began to whisper nervously to one another. Stocks would plummet if the project was canceled. Derek saw their hesitation and a twisted smile began to form on his face. He thought he had found a stalemate. He thought he was too big to fail. I walked calmly to the podium, the sound of my heels clicking on the stage floor cutting through the murmur of the crowd. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out 2 items. One was a silver USB drive. The other was a tattered, yellowing legal folder that smelled of dust and time. "Actually, Derek," I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the room, "you have forgotten one fundamental detail about the day we started this company." I opened the old folder and held up a document. The paper was brittle, the ink slightly faded, but the signatures were unmistakable. 15 years ago, when we founded Horizon in our apartment, you were worried that I would leave you and take my designs elsewhere, I explained, looking down at him. So you insisted on a very specific contract, but because you were too cheap to hire a real lawyer, you downloaded a template from the internet, and that template contained a clause called Original Author Rights. Derek blinked, confusion clouding his panic. He had not read that contract in a decade and a half. Clause 4, Section B, I recited from memory. All intellectual property, including preliminary sketches, core structural designs, and conceptual renderings, remains the sole property of the original creator until a formal transfer of ownership is signed and notarized. I plugged the USB drive into the console, and a new image appeared on the massive screen. It was the official copyright registration for the Skyline project. The name listed under owner was not Horizon Architects. It was not Derek Vance. It was Elena Rostova. I drew Skyline. Derek, I said, my voice hard as steel. I drew it 3 years ago while you were out partying with Sloane. And because you were too lazy, too arrogant, and too busy cheating to handle the paperwork, You never asked me to sign the transfer forms. You assumed that because I was your wife, you owned my mind. You were wrong." The color drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He did not own the building. He did not own the design. He did not even own the paper it was printed on. I turned to the shareholders, who were now looking at me with awe rather than fear. As the sole legal owner of the Skyline intellectual property, I announced, my voice ringing with authority, "I am officially revoking Derek Vance's license to use my designs. He has nothing to leverage. He has nothing to bargain with. The project belongs to me, and under my leadership, it will stay at Horizon." Derek stood there, his mouth agape. The leverage he thought he held had turned into smoke. He had lost his job. He had lost his money. He had lost his reputation. And now, he realized he had lost the one thing he prided himself on, which was his legacy. "No," Derek whispered, the word barely escaping his throat. It cannot be." He looked at his empty hands. He looked at the police officers who were now closing in on him. The fight went out of him completely. His shoulders slumped, and his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the stage floor, not from force, but from the sheer weight of his own failure. He was a king stripped of his crown, sobbing into the wood paneling in front of 500 people who used to worship him. "Get him out of my sight," I said coldly, turning my back on him for the last time. The walk of shame down the center aisle of the Millennium Hall was a spectacle that the press would talk about for years. Derek and Sloan, once the golden couple of the evening, were now handcuffed and flanked by officers. The room was a blinding storm of camera flashes, but this time, the photos were not for the society pages. They were for the criminal record. 500 shareholders watched in silence, their eyes filled with a mixture of shock and disdain. Derek tried to hide his face, but there was nowhere to hide. Sloan was sobbing openly, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks, ruining the facade she had spent hours perfecting. When the heavy doors finally swung shut behind them, a collective sigh of relief seemed to deflate the tension in the room. Arthur Sterling walked up to the podium. He did not look tired, he looked energized. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his voice steady and reassuring, "we have weathered a storm today, but storms clear the air. It is the decision of the board, effective immediately, to appoint Mrs. Elena Rostova as the new chief executive officer of Horizon Architects." Applause started slowly, a few claps from the front row, and then it swelled into a thunderous standing ovation. I walked up the stairs, not with the arrogance that Derek used to wear like a cheap suit, but with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew she belonged there. I stood behind the podium and placed my hands on the wood. It felt solid. It felt right. "Thank you," I said, waiting for the noise to die down. "We have a lot of work to do, and we are going to start by rebranding our flagship project. The name Skyline represents a view from a distance. We are not looking from a distance anymore. From today, this project will be known as Project Phoenix, because we are going to rise from the ashes of this disaster stronger, better, and more honest than before." The cheers were deafening. It has been 6 months since that day. The world has moved on, but justice has a way of lingering. Derek is currently living in a studio apartment in Queens that is half the size of the closet he used to share with me. He is drowning in legal fees and lawsuits from the shareholders he tried to defraud. Last I heard, he was working as a junior sales associate at a flooring tile showroom, trying to sell bathroom ceramics to people who have no idea he used to be a CEO. He sends me emails sometimes, begging for a settlement, but I send them straight to the trash folder without reading a single word. Sloan fared no better. The moment the scandal broke, Julian Thorne dropped her like a hot stone. He released a statement claiming he had no knowledge of her actions and that she was a rogue agent. She was left alone, pregnant, and facing a suspended prison sentence for corporate espionage. She is raising her child in a small town 3 states away, living off state benefits and whatever help her parents can provide. She lost the rich husband, the rich lover, and the career she stole to get. I sat in my office on the top floor of the Horizon building. The view of New York City was breathtaking. On my mahogany desk, there was a small silver ashtray. I held an old photograph in my hand. It was a picture of me, Derek, and Sloane from 5 years ago at a Christmas party. We were all smiling. We looked so happy. I struck a match. The flame flared up, bright and hungry. I held it to the corner of the photograph. "Goodbye," I whispered softly. I watched the fire consume Derek's smile, then Sloane's face, and finally, the naive woman I used to be. I dropped the burning paper into the ashtray and watched it curl into gray ash. I did not feel a rush of malicious joy. I just felt light. It was the feeling of putting down a heavy suitcase after carrying it for miles. I had taken the trash out, and my house was finally clean. I turned my chair away from the ashes and looked at the fresh drafting paper on my desk. I picked up my favorite pen. For the first time in 15 years, I was not drawing for Derek. I was not drawing for the company. I was drawing for me. I began to sketch the lines of a new building, one with wide windows and strong foundations, just like the new life I was building for myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment down below with your location and let me know what you thought of Derek and Sloane's punishment. If you enjoyed seeing karma do its work, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, hit that like button, and turn on the notification bell so more people can hear this story.